Hello YouTubers, my name is Frederick Lopez and may the 4th be with you. Today I'm going to present my favorite Star Wars films. This is going to be a ranking from my least favorite to most favorite. Now this is just my personal preferences of films. So if you disagree, feel free to make your own list in the comments below and let me know what are your least favorite to most favorite Star Wars films. Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, I love all the Star Wars films, but if I had to choose least favorite, it's one I enjoy a great deal, but I just don't think it's as good as some of the other films, and that is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Now, do I hate this film like some people? No, I'm actually really quite fond of this film. I like the beginning stuff. I like Darth Maul, Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it has the best lightsaber fight out of any of the original 6 films. The pod racing scene is phenomenal. Ultimately, it just maybe has a bit too much Jar Jar, and the computerized effects have not aged as well as some of the other effects in the either later on or previous films. But Phantom Menace would probably be on the bottom of my list, but I do not think it is a bad movie, as many others say, but I just don't think it's as good as the other Star Wars films. For that, it's at the bottom of my list. Above Phantom Menace would be Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. I actually really love this. Unlike Phantom Menace, this feels closer to being a Star Wars film. However, they do double down on the CGI, but it's great to see that it's one of the first films to be filmed entirely digital, without film. George Lucas is very ahead of the curve here. You have Hayden Christensen now playing an older Anakin Skywalker. I like the stuff with Jango Fett, Boba Fett, Samuel Jackson as Mace Windu having a larger role, Christopher Lee as Count Dooku, the stuff on Geonosis, him going back to Tatooine, that scene where his mother dies, you meeting a younger Uncle Lone and Aunt Beru, and as well, you also have the romance with Anakin and Padme. Some very good scenes between them two. While not as realistic as Han Solo and Princess Leia's romance scene, I still like the story. It's very different, and you get to see the origins of this universe. And most of all, that last lightsaber fight, when Yoda reveals his lightsaber, is just phenomenal. You couldn't really do that with a puppet. This was also the first time where Yoda was completely computer generated. Ultimately, I think it's a step above Phantom Menace, and while not as good as the original trilogy, it still is a very entertaining film on its own. I saw this numerous times back when it came out in 2002, even had the marshmallow cereal, so Attack of the Clones really holds a special place in my heart. And then yeah, that ending going on to the Clone Wars. I love this film. It's very action-packed and enjoyable. It's just a fun adventure. Above Attack of the Clones, I would put Star Wars The Force Awakens. I enjoyed this film, but I did not love that as much as everyone else. I thought it was just a blatant rip-off of A New Hope, and it was just quite underwhelming. Now, I know they need to set up new characters, which it did very well. It's just the writing and everything didn't feel very Star Wars with some of the dialogue, some of the stuff with Finn, Rey, but I did like BB-8. BB-8 was a great addition. And I love Han Solo in this film. Harrison Ford as Han Solo really makes the film. And I liked Kylo Ren as a villain up until he took off his mask. Then it just started going downhill. Now the first half of this movie, the first third of it is fantastic. Probably the best Star Wars movie ever. It's really when it gets to its second and third acts that the film kind of goes down in my book. And then ultimately, the hero of the original trilogy, Luke Skywalker, only being in the last 40 seconds with no dialogue? What? I don't know, it's just when you watch it continually, after Return of the Jedi, it just feels very underwhelming and a cheap ripoff of A New Hope. In a way, it's its own movie, but it still copies the story. You realize you've seen it in another film. Kind of like when you watch Superman Returns, you watch it and then you realize, hey, this is enjoyable, but I think I've seen this plot in a better film called Superman the Movie. That's how I feel with Force Awakens. The more I think about this film, the more it just kind of pisses me off, and I would actually rank it under Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. But I love how J.J. Abrams goes back to having a practical, real universe character of Rey, which I hope is a Skywalker. And even though the fights aren't as good and they just do a Starkiller base, which is kind of a lazy Death Star 3, I still like it. I love Han, Leia, Chewbacca, seeing some old faces in that ending. Ultimately, it's a promise to a good trilogy, and I hope that the next two carry on what Force Awakens started. I can't fully judge it because it's the first part of a new trilogy, and until I see the next two parts, I feel like I would have more thoughts on the film. And the only part that really bogs me down is Han Solo dying. I know he had to. I like that it was his son, it wasn't a stranger, but just like Captain Kirk in Star Trek, He died on a bridge in the 7th installment, and that part's just kind of bullshit to me. I'm like, I really wish they got one last scene with Princess Leia, Luke Skywalker, and Han Solo. At least one, whether it be in a flashback or in modern day. And with Carrie Fisher sadly passing away, we'll never see the three iconic characters together on film, and that really bogs me down because I feel like it was a missed opportunity. There's so many directions where this could have gone, and ultimately, I think them having a release date and rushing it affected the film. So it's above Attack of the Clones. Above Star Wars The Force Awakens, I list the spin-off movie Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Wow, I really did not have any high expectations for this film, but this film just blew me away. It made me feel like I was a 6-year-old watching the VHS trilogy of Star Wars. I mean, it is just awesome. Now, the lack of an opening crawl bothers me. You could tell something was missing there, and I know why they didn't do it, but I was like, why? Battlefront, the game had it. Force Unleashed, the video game had open. Like, everything Star Wars has had an opening crawl. You don't have to have it only to saga films, so I feel like that would have benefited it. But it is a little bit rushed from places to places, characters to characters, and times at the beginning. But I still was able to follow it, and I liked the character of Jyn Erso. They didn't have to put it in our faces that she was a female character. She was her own individual woman. And it didn't feel like it was trying too hard to say, hey, we have a female character, and do stuff like that. Like, it was great, a very diverse cast. Gareth Edwards surprised me. I wasn't a big fan of Godzilla, but this film was just knocking it out of the park. Donnie Yen, Diego Luna, how it ties to the prequel trilogies and original trilogies, and just blends them both seamlessly. And ultimately, it's the second half of this film that really bumps it up. This is the first Star Wars film to really deal with the war aspect of it. And it's a good movie when it makes an already great movie even greater with Star Wars. You feel more emotion with that Death Star climax in the original film after Rogue One. And who could forget Grand Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader in that hallway? It's just the best scene of Darth Vader ever. It was awesome. And then Princess Leia at the end of the film. Ultimately, it's an enjoyable film, breath of fresh air that had a sense of originality and a different aspect of the Star Wars universe that wasn't yet explored. It didn't have to rip off another movie. It did something entirely different. And includes one of my favorite space fights since Return of the Jedi. And I love all the little nods to not only the films, but also the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels TV shows. It's just phenomenal. Now, this film was tied with Rogue One, but they kind of have pros and cons to one another, but I still think, upon repeated viewings, I have Revenge of the Sith over Rogue One. Revenge of the Sith is the one prequel movie that just went all out. George Lucas could have just made Revenge of the Sith and called it a day with a prequel trilogy, because it is just a tragedy. It's an amazing film. The first Star Wars to be PG-13. Hayden Christensen, I think, was more comfortable with blue screen and stuff. He really went into the role of Anakin Skywalker. Ewan McGregor, I always loved him as Obi-Wan Kenobi, but here he was channeling Alec Guinness. Everything going into the original film is just phenomenal. It starts off where the original animated Clone Wars left off with General Grievous on the loose, them rescuing the Supreme Chancellor, and they rescue him. They must stop General Grievous, and ultimately it's about the Sith rising to power and Anakin Skywalker taking that step to become Darth Vader. And it's done in such a tragic way. It's really relatable. He's not just like some emo kid saying, I want to turn bad. No, he's trying to save his wife from dying, and you can see the reasons why he turns bad. Mace Windu, Emperor fight, this movie just has everything. The Yoda Emperor fight, and that climatic battle with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker and Mustafar is that just speaks volumes, not only with the scenes, the choreography, but also just the mess and scene of everything, the metaphor of that lava planet. Anakin's hell now. And I just love how it ended. I always wanted a Star Wars movie to end like that with the two sons, and it is just a perfect full circle conclusion to the original Star Wars saga done by George Lucas. Say what you will about the prequels, but Revenge of the Sith, he got a lot right, and I'm glad he ended it on a high note instead of a low note. It was a very good ending for the Star Wars series for a period of time. And this goes to my number one. I'm going to kind of cop out of this, and by that I mean I count the entire original Star Wars trilogy as my favorite Star Wars. It's hard. It's like asking me what's my favorite Dark Knight trilogy movie. I'm like, there's some parts where I enjoy Batman Begins. Dark Knight, like Empire Strikes Back, is a best made movie, but then part of me really enjoys and has a higher rewatchability of Dark Knight Rises, much like Return of the Jedi. So it's kind of hard for me. Now, Empire clearly is the best made film, and then Star Wars, without that you wouldn't have Empire or Return of the Jedi, but Return of the Jedi is just so enjoyable and a great emotional conclusion. So it just really depends what mood I'm in, and I just count all of them as one. They're all my number one. The original Star Wars trilogy is just perfect to me. I grew up on that trilogy, inspired me to be a filmmaker. Just everything about it. Star Wars, it's setting up the universe, the hero's journey, Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan, Darth Vader, help me Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope, and then that Death Star explosion, Han Solo helping out, the throne room music, and then speaking of music, you have Imperial March and Empire Strikes Back, the whole revelation of like, no, I am your father. And just everything, the introduction of Yoda, one of the best puppet performances ever, done by Frank Oz. I Love You, I Know, Lando Calrissian, and then you get them freeing Han from Jabba's palace, Princess Leia in a bikini, the green lightsaber, Yoda passing away, Luke finding out that Princess Leia is his sister through Obi-Wan, and then that climatic fight where you actually see the Emperor for the first time, and Darth Vader and Luke engage in that climatic battle, and then ultimately the galaxy is freed. Perfect conclusion. Even with and without the special edition changes and the changes over the years, I count that in my number one spot for all of them. Just a great, fantastic trilogy that makes up Star Wars. It shows us why Star Wars is so important to everyone. It has that magic. It's the reason why it's still standing strong today after so many years, even with the depressions of like no Star Wars merchandise, films, or games, to being in a surplus, to being owned by Disney. There are the reason why Star Wars is so strong today, and those three films influenced the way movies were made for the upcoming decades. So yeah, Star Wars trilogy is my number one. I know that's a cop-out, but it was really hard to choose. So those are my favorite Star Wars movies in a ranking order. So yeah, I really can't wait to see what Last Jedi does. I hope it's not an Empire Strikes Back remake, but I hope everyone out there has a happy May the 4th. May the 4th be with you, always.